Good morning, it's Tuesday the 24th of October in London. This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, Hamas frees 2 more hostages from Gaza as the US sends more forces to the Middle East. Barclays disappoints in its latest results with a poor performance from its investment bank and signals structural cost-cutting ahead. And bond bears beware. Billionaire investors Bill Ackman and Bill Gross abandon their short position on US Treasuries. Let's start with a roundup of our top stories. The latest unemployment data from the UK, looking for that number for the June to August unemployment rate at 4.2% now, using the new calculation for UK jobs data. And also some breaking news on those jobs figures on UK employment falling 82,000 in the 3 months ending in August. The claimant count rate at 4%, and that is holding steady to the previous reading. These are the figures for September. Let's get to more of our top stories this morning. Hamas has freed 2 more hostages from the Gaza Strip. The 2 elderly women were released to the International Committee of the Red Cross, while more than 200 others are still being held by militants. The move is giving some Israeli officials cause to rethink the scope of a planned ground invasion of Gaza. Bloomberg's Michael Heath says the releases are helping diplomatic calls for restraint.
This movement of people coming out encourages leaders to encourage Israel to engage and to hold off in terms of the ground invasion until they can get more people out. Qatar and Egypt negotiated this release. So at this stage, we're still waiting on the ground operation, and obviously there's still talks going on with the hostages. President Joe Biden has said once the hostages are released, we can start talking about a ceasefire.
Our reporter Michael Heath pointing out that US President Joe Biden appeared to suggest a ceasefire could be discussed if all hostages were released. Well, one of the 2 women freed in Gaza was a British citizen. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak told MPs Hamas must be held accountable.
Hamas is not only a threat to Israel, but to many others across the region. All the leaders I met agree that this is a watershed moment. It's time to set the region on a better path.
The Prime Minister also announced more money for aid for Gaza. Only a fraction of normal supplies are currently being allowed into the territory. The EU's chief diplomat, Josep Borrell, says aid is his top priority.
We have to start thinking of how to revive the political process. But the priority at that moment is to make humanitarian support going into Gaza.
Josep Borrell, the EU High Representative on Foreign Affairs, joining the international calls for restraint. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi reiterating that Israel must protect civilians and abide by humanitarian law, even as it has the right to defend itself. Some of the bond market's most prominent bears are saying the rout in US Treasuries has gone too far. Pershing Square founder Bill Ackman says he's unwinding his bets against US government bonds. Bloomberg's Sonali Basak explains why.
The reason he is taking off this short position now is he says there's too much risk in the world to remain short bonds at current long-term rates. The economy is slowing faster than recent data suggests. So that implies worries about a further bid in the bond market, perhaps a haven bid as the economy starts to slow down.
As Sonali Basak notes, Ackman's scepticism on the health of the US economy stands in contrast to surprisingly strong recent economic data. PIMCO co-founder Bill Gross agrees with Ackman. He's predicting a recession by the end of the year and says he's buying short-dated interest rate futures. The Bank of Japan has announced an unscheduled bond buying operation, the 5th since tweaking yield curve control in July. Traders are testing the central bank's resolve ahead of next week's policy meeting. The BOJ's loose policy is also contributing to the depreciation of the yen, which is the worst performing group of 10 currency this year. And those are your top stories on the programme this morning. On the markets, Euro Stoxx 50 futures are flat to the upside at the moment. The MSCI Irish Pacific Index is 0.3% higher, and the 10-year Treasury yield is a basis point lower at 4.84%. Well, let's turn to the latest from the Middle East. Those release of 2 more hostages, a lot more still being held by Hamas, though. Another call, too, between the US President Joe Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu discussing US deployments to the region, among other issues. Bloomberg's EMEA News Director Ros Matheson joins us now for more. Good morning to you, Ros. The release of 2 more hostages from Gaza, how significant is that, and what does it tell us about the effectiveness of diplomatic efforts being made to release them?
Well, certainly it's terrific news for those women and their families, mediated, as you were saying earlier, by Qatar and Egypt to get them released. But of course, it leaves more than 200 still there. And it's moving very slowly. If we're getting a couple of hostages released at a time, it's hard to see how long this is going to take to get them all released. And of course, the thorny question for Israel is that Hamas doesn't show any inclination to negotiate the release of Israeli citizens. The ones who can be released potentially are those who might hold US citizenship or British citizenship or dual citizenship. But if you're an Israeli national, it becomes far more complex. Hamas doesn't seem to be interested. And of course, Israel's own policy of negotiation there might come in. And so this is very slow going. Very good news, obviously, overnight for those 2 women. But the broader sort of frame of this does seem to be the perception that until there's greater progress on the hostage front, that it's not the best thing for Israel to be considering a full ground war.
Yes, and we've been reporting, in fact, about the pressure on the government in Israel to rethink the scope of a ground invasion of Gaza. What more can you tell us about that?
Well, that does seem to be the way things are going, and not just because of the discussions Israel might be having with the US and other allies, but also the conversations within Israel. There's a sense that the Israeli military feels they're ready to go. They've been mobilizing troops for weeks, 300,000 or so in the area. They've been bringing a lot of equipment to the area. They've been stepping up the aerial bombardment of Gaza. That's been intensifying day by day, and they're very much ready to go. So it's a political decision at this point when or how to go in. And there seems to be a sort of at least a forceful conversation going on within the establishment of Israel, like whether to go in, how to go in, whether to have a more targeted invasion after time, whether the aerial bombardment can do some of the work that they seek in terms of their efforts to wipe out Hamas, which was responsible for the October 7 attack on Israel. So there's a lot of conversation going on, not just externally, but also within Israel itself.
Meanwhile, we've had the first comments from China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi. What should we be reading into what we heard from him?
Well, it seems to be echoing what's been said by other Chinese officials in recent days, including President Xi Jinping last week, and that he's saying, yes, they understand the need of every country to defend itself, and they appreciate that Israel needs to protect its civilians, but also saying that civilians must be protected in all of this. And China's stated position, of course, is a two-state position. They support the establishment of a Palestinian state. They've expressed concern about the humanitarian situation inside Gaza. They've been a bit careful about criticizing Hamas directly and condemning them for their attack on Israel. So they're walking very much a traditional China foreign policy line, I should say, on this issue. So the comments from the Foreign Minister Wang Yi, who of course is going to be meeting with US officials later this week ahead of a possible meeting between Presidents Biden and Xi Jinping, he's very much walking the line there, which is sort of China wants to support Israel in this moment, but is also sort of stopping short of very strong condemnation of Hamas.
At the same time, Ros, we've had Emmanuel Macron arriving in Israel this morning. There was a meeting of EU foreign ministers yesterday, which they didn't come to an agreement about calling for this humanitarian pause. This is something that's now going down the line to an EU leaders meeting later this week.
That's right. It's interesting they call it a pause. I mean, really what they're saying is whether they should call for a ceasefire, which means Israel stopping its aerial attack on Gaza, but also Hamas stopping its continued attacks into Israel. But Macron is particularly interesting in this, and he is there in Israel today as you say, because he's been quite strong in the past of sort of calling also for the creation of a Palestinian state and expressing concerns about encroachments, as he sees it, into the West Bank. So whether if he sort of makes those comments again on Israeli soil, it'll be interesting to see how warmly welcomed he truly is. He's possibly the least close leader of Europe to the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He's always, as I said, been quite forceful in his comments about supporting a Palestinian state. Of course, he will express, as other leaders have, their horror what happened to Israel, but he may also make those comments about Palestine to the Israeli leader. So it'll be interesting to see whether he gets quite the effusive welcome that other leaders have.
Okay, Rosalind Matheson, our EMEA News Director, thank you very much for joining us with the latest developments from the Middle East this morning. And we will continue to follow that, of course, throughout the programme here as well. We've seen live pictures of Emmanuel Macron stepping off the plane there in Tel Aviv this morning. Well, let's turn to financial matters next and the latest results from Barclays this morning. Their CIB revenue for the third quarter missing the average analyst estimates. Let's get the details now from Jenny Serrain, who's our UK and EMEA finance team leader. Jenny, great to have you with us this morning. Can you walk us through, first of all, the headlines from Barclays numbers?
Yeah, I mean, I think so far what we're seeing is a lot of misses and both the trading revenue is quite short of what analysts were expecting. I think the outlook is also not quite what folks were expecting. So it seems like we are really experiencing a lot of down arrows here and just a lighter quarter than what folks really predicted.
What about the outlook that we heard about, that we're seeing kind of commentary around in the statement from the CEO as well? Are things looking brighter or are still more trouble ahead?
No, I think it's definitely still more trouble ahead. So they had a pretty clear warning for folks. They said that they are actually evaluating actions to further take down their structural cost base. And so I think, we've already reported on a lot of layoffs at this company. I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of that.
This is interesting because it's on a day when we're looking at results, of course, from some of the big European banking names after we've had the reporting season already in the United States as well. I mean, how does the picture compare when you think about the challenges facing the big Wall Street names and a player like Barclays, which at one stage, of course, was considered a serious rival, but very different position it's in today?
Yeah, it's interesting because I do think across Wall Street, we're seeing banks really try to take rein in costs and really take stronger, firmer actions on expenses. And so you see more of that from Barclays today. They're warning that, we are taking cost actions and that could actually result in material charges. And so in one sense, they're on the same page. In another sense, trading is such a feast or famine business. And so while we've had a lot of companies come out and beat on trading, you've had Citigroup, you've had Bank of America beat on trading. You see Barclays here missing. And so I think this is just an example of, why investors sometimes are hesitant to believe in trading businesses, because it can just be something that, either really beats and carries the bank, or it can be something that, misses and causes a greater worry.
When we think about where I suppose the situation is going to improve, I'm mindful that CS Venkatakrishnan the CEO of Barclays, spoke to our colleague Francine Lacqua on the In the City podcast recently on Bloomberg, saying that a deal-making revival still looks a little further away. These figures would seem to present a fairly pessimistic picture, perhaps making CS Venkatakrishna's comments look a little understated when it comes to the outlook.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And I think, we started out this year and a lot of bank CEOs were willing to say that the third quarter was when that rebound would happen. And they thought the second half was going to be their moment for investment banking. And I mean, these results today and what we've seen across the banking industry so far this year, that hasn't come to fruition. And so I think you've seen a lot of big bank CEOs really walking back those comments and saying, we can't we can't call a moment. We can't say when this rebound is going to happen. And these results obviously show that. I mean, it hasn't happened yet. And it's hard to know when that could come back, especially, when you've got central banks around the world still hiking interest rates. I think a lot of corporate CEOs are still on the sidelines, and you just see more of that today.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond. Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere you get your podcasts. You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com. Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa device. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.